When Josephine first saw Rip, she immediately wanted to meet him. But her boyfriend Danny was very cautious around pit bulls and spent a long time wondering whether they should even go to the shelter. And when he finally met Rip, things went nothing like he expected. But this story began long before they ever met. Before Rip met Josephine and Danny, he had been living on the streets. Then one day, he ran right up to a group of people all on his own. He was so happy to see them that he jumped straight into their car without a second thought. They took him to a shelter, where he waited for someone to decide to bring him home. Sometime later, Josephine saw his picture on the shelter's website. In the photo, Rip was looking back over his shoulder, and there was something about that look she could not get out of her mind. Josephine kept going back to the picture, and each time she wanted even more to meet him. But there was one problem. Her boyfriend Danny had never lived with a pit bull before, and he was not at all sure he was ready to bring home a dog of that breed. After Josephine saw Rick's picture, all she wanted was to get to the shelter and meet him as soon as possible. But convincing Danny turned out to be much harder than she expected. Josephine was not asking him to bring Rip home right away. She only wanted Danny to agree to go meet him and see what he was like. It took 4 months to convince him, and the whole time, Josephine had no idea whether Rip would still be at the shelter or whether someone else would adopt him first. But when Josephine and Danny finally arrived, Rip was still there. He immediately got their attention. He was jumping so high that at one point, all 4 paws were off the ground at the same time. And from the very first moment, he acted like one pig-lovable goofball. Rip ran over to Josephine and licked her face, but she just smiled because she knew she was not the one he needed to win over. Everything now depended on whether Rip could win Danny over. After Rip licked Josephine, he turned almost all of his attention to Danny. He walked over, calmly sat beside him, and acted as though they had known each other for years. It looked so natural that Josephine could tell almost immediately that a bond was forming between them, even though it was hard to put into words. That was when Danny's doubts slowly began to fade. Not long before, he had not been ready to bring home a pit bull, but now he was willing to take Rip home. And the moment Rip walked through the door of his new home, he acted as though he had lived there for years. At the time, Josephine and Danny had no idea that Rip would quickly turn their everyday life upside down. When Rip first arrived at their home, he jumped onto the couch, picked out a spot for himself, and it has been his spot ever since. But Josephine and Danny quickly realized that life with him was not going to be quiet. Rip was a very energetic dog who was always looking for attention. He loved stealing things he knew he was not supposed to have, then running off as though he were inviting Josephine and Danny to chase him. That very first weekend, they took him on a camping trip. Rip rode in a boat, loved being outdoors, played with other dogs, and looked as though this was the life he had been missing all along.
Come here, Ripples.
That was when Josephine and Danny knew for sure that Rip fit perfectly into their lives. But during their walks, people began stopping them more and more often to ask the same thing. And Josephine and Danny still did not know the answer. On nearly every walk, someone would stop and ask what breed Rip was, but Josephine and Danny could not give them an answer. They only knew that Rip was definitely part pit bull, so eventually they decided to have a DNA test done. The results were unexpected. Rip turned out to be a mix of American Pit Bull Terrier, Staffordshire Terrier, Basset Hound, and Bloodhound. But that was not the last surprise. Through Embark, Josephine and Danny unexpectedly found Rip's biological brother, a dog named Ronnie. It turned out that Ronnie had also been rescued from a shelter located about an hour away. They contacted his owners and arranged to meet in San Francisco. Still, no one knew for sure whether the brothers would recognize each other after being apart for so long. Josephine and Danny were very excited about the meeting in San Francisco, but as soon as the brothers saw each other from opposite ends of the beach, they both took off running toward one another. From then on, Rip and Ronnie started seeing each other regularly. They went on trips together, played, ran around, and wrestled with each other for hours. Sometimes, Ronnie came to stay overnight with Rip, and the two dogs would lie side by side. They had to be separated, or they would take up almost the entire bed. For Danny, this story changed the way he felt about an entire breed. He once had doubts about getting a pit bull at all, but now he says these are the dogs he wants to rescue in the future. Josephine smiles and calls Rip her teacup cow, and she's grateful for every adventure he's brought into their lives. There is still one habit she hopes to change someday, and that is Rip waking her up at exactly 4:50 every morning for breakfast.